Hey guys, what's up? So this guy, Punk Patriot, I liked him on Facebook quite a while ago, and he made a video about non-voting and his opposition to it. And I just wanted to make a video response. This probably will be around 15 minutes. Tried to cut it down to, wanted it to be around 10, but 15 is fine enough. So let's get right into this. So for those who aren't aware, my name's Nick Ford. You might be watching my channel for the first time. I consider myself a left libertarian, generally speaking. You can go to all-left.net to see what that's all about. An anarchist without adjectives, more strictly speaking. And I also consider myself a non-voter. So although I'm a libertarian, I don't support Gary Johnson or Ron Paul or any of those candidates, nor do I support Jill Stein. I'm also part of a broader effort called the Vote for Nobody campaign, and I support that. We'll get into that a little bit later, but I just wanted to give a brief intro, and let's get into my objections to Punk Patriot. So the first thing he says is voting is an endorsement of their policies, and by their policies he means politicians, of course. Now, although you say this is self-evident, Punk, I must say that often the most ferocious of lies are hidden by statements such as these, such as, "Oh, well, that's easy. Oh, that's simple. That's just common sense." You know, plenty of people say that. But let's examine this a bit closer and in more depth. Now, the statement actually takes us back to what voting actually is, so I'm going to get a little philosophical for a second by asking the question, well, what is voting? So, voting is, as I understand it, a symbolic showing of support towards a certain candidate. Now, you say that the symbolic support necessarily entails, at least you seem to be saying that necessitates, some sort of agreement with all of the person's policies that they're voting for. But how true is this actually? Well, let's examine. First, we must remember that while the signal of voting is taken to mean support, in actuality it could be a mock vote. People could be joking around or not actually care what their vote does, and they don't even know the politician to begin with. People do this. Or it could be a vote done by peer pressure and hence not of one's full or pure will. That also happens. Or it could be a vote simply to oppose the other party, as many people do. It's also very common, especially in the case of Obama, to simply vote for the most charismatic politician, and not necessarily voting because of his policy positions. So all these things happen. So it seems to me that even right off the bat, it seems that much more gray whether voting is actually constituting some sort of de facto agreement with a candidate's positions. It could obviously be about something completely different than their positions. It could be about who they are or whatever. So obviously the intention could be something very different. Now, that's not to say that people can't vote with the intent of saying, yes, I agree with all their positions, or that doesn't mean that they can't say, I'm going to vote for said candidate, and that means to me that I agree with all their policy positions. I actually don't really know anybody who votes for a politician and agrees with all their positions, although I know that you're speaking in a different sense. But to assign them specific intentions or to assign them specific responsibilities to their symbolic actions when symbols can obviously be, tend to be kind of tricky and subjective sometimes, it seems to stem from some sort of presumption of a higher knowledge than I think you actually have, which, by the way, is not the same thing as saying I think you're stupid or you're an idiot or whatever. I'm just saying I think you're trying to prove too much, or you're trying to claim that you have more knowledge than you could actually possibly have, than I could possibly have. So, not personally insulting you. If I was, that would be a personal insult to me too. Just about human limitations. So you say that we have a choice between murdering children in foreign countries by Democrats and Republicans and not doing so. Well, first, let's examine, briefly, whether this choice even exists. Now, as I've already made clear, choosing to vote for anyone is a lot more murky and complex, at the least, than you presume. So right from the get-go, this choice that you talk about seems less obvious to me. But let's say that your presumptions are still correct. Let's go with them anyway, that that you voting actually means consenting or whatever. Does this choice still exist? Well, no, and I'll attempt to explain why. Again, try to do it briefly. I certainly agree Romney and Barack's policies, foreign or domestic or whatever, aren't to my liking, and that murdering children isn't a good thing. Now, that should be obvious, but just so we're clear, that's where I stand on that. Even still, if there's no actual threat to them getting elected and thus having more children not die, then the choice isn't actually much of a choice to begin with. Another presumption you I say seemingly because I'm going off of things I got from your argument, not stuff you stated yourself, so if I'm wrong, I do apologize and feel free to correct me. But you seem to think that Stein or any other third candidate actually has some chance of winning. But if you don't, and from here on out, I'll assume that you don't, just so we don't go on the other topic of, whether they have a chance of winning or not, at least for now, then how does this choice actually exist to begin with? In reality, more children are going to die in the election no matter what you do, right? Because statistically, vote doesn't matter. So it seems to me that according to your logic, and I'll get to that in a little bit. So it seems to me that according to your logic, we're all culpable for the deaths of children, which, I kind of see from a certain perspective, but it's coming from a different perspective than you are. So I can't really agree with what you're saying necessarily. Abdicating your responsibility to record your position. That's what you're accusing people who don't vote. Well, this seems to be relying on the presumption that there aren't other ways to record your opposition, which is, of course, a fallacy. A fallacy that's called a false dilemma, to be exact. Because you're saying that we either have the choice of recording our opposition through a vote or through nothing. But of course, historically speaking and realistically speaking, there are plenty of ways to record your opposition to the presidency of murdering children. For example, just in this video alone, I've done all of that. And I've literally recorded it. Like, it's on the internet and will probably be forever there. The voting records, well, I wouldn't trust them to do the same thing, especially due to the questionable rate of hacking that goes on with them via corporations that make them and politicians that are in league with the corporations in question. Now, you say that if you abstain from voting, you are complicit in murder. Now, this would only be true if your vote could actually prevent the murder to begin with, but again, statistically speaking, it can't. And your vote really doesn't matter at all, and therefore, if voting for main candidates doesn't matter, then voting for third candidates necessarily doesn't matter even more. For more on the statistics of your vote, you can check out the Reason.com article about your vote doesn't count. Also, like to point out that linking an article does not mean I 100% forever agree with it and all of its points till infinity. It just means that I think, at least in this case, the general idea that your vote doesn't count resonates with me. I don't necessarily agree with all the arguments it gives, but I do think it gives enough good arguments to warrant a link. So don't presume that just because you found a weak argument or bad argument, I must necessarily want to defend it or agree with it. So just throwing that out there. The murder comparison that you make. Well, personally, I don't use the argument of if you vote, you're consenting to the system. I think I've already kind of established that. So it doesn't have much relevancy to me. But either way, I honestly don't see how the comparison works. You again seem to be presuming the vote would actually stop murders, or could. But of course, like I've already said, it can't. Now, fortunately, I can use direct action, i.e. using my will without the proper authorities say so, to stop the murder, and that's actually a lot more effective than simply filling out some paperwork for 5 minutes while some woman is getting shot and beaten and whatever else, or, person in general, and hoping the murder just goes away, when statistically, that just won't happen. Now, you say people could accuse you of moralistic demagoguery. Hey man, I wasn't going to say anything like that, truth be told, but if you want to set yourself up for your own insults at the expense of yourself, then, you be your guest. Be my guest, To consent to something is to be complicit. That's another thing you've said, or you say in the video. Okay, so consenting just means agreeing, or giving positive reinforcement, etc., etc. I don't think we need to really go over that philosophically, or definitionally. But what does it mean, what does being complicit mean, just so we're clear? Generally speaking, complicit means being aware of something that's going on and having the power to do something about it, because if you didn't have the power, well, what the hell would it matter, right? But not acting on said awareness and power to prevent whatever wrongdoing you know is going on. And this is another important part of being complicit in something. You know it's going on for a fact. It's not a maybe or maybe not. But the main thing I'd say here is that your vote doesn't have such power, so this argument doesn't add much to what you're getting at. You're talking about the General Assembly model. I'd just like to point out I really like that model. I've used it a few times in Occupy meetings here in New Hampshire. Definitely something that's cool and something I like. But you say in the General Assembly model, if you do not block, then you consent. Well, okay, so that's the rules of the General Assembly. I agree there that if you don't block, it's taken as a consent. And that may be right or wrong. I'm not going to go over that. It seems kind of a tangent to me. But what does that have to do with a representative style of organizing? It doesn't seem to have much to do with it to me, because blocking isn't something you can do in electoral politics as it stands, at least not in any equivalent sense. The closest thing I can think of is kicking out politicians for making bad policies, but that's when they've already made those bad policies. So, that's the big difference between representative democracy and direct democracy. One's, a lot less direct. So none of us have the power to block any given policy or policymaker unless we're the policymakers ourselves, which puts us in a pretty big conundrum if we actually want to advocate any sort of meaningful democracy. And if we do, we're certainly not acting on such a thing to a big extent, at least to my knowledge, which points to us either probably not seeing the point of doing something like that, using something worse, or thinking about this the wrong way, maybe a combination, or maybe none of the above and something else, etc., etc. You say that if you do not vote against the policies you oppose, you are consenting to them. I've pretty much demonstrated that this argument is, at best, on some pretty shaky grounds, given the phenomenons of human action and the presumptions of knowledge on your part. And, like I said, comparing two totally different models of organization, I didn't say this explicitly, but kind of implied in my argument, I think, is that trying to compare two totally different models of organization, direct democracy, representative democracy, isn't too likely of a point to really improve your argument. And for my part, I don't think it did. So, by failing to record your opposition, you are consenting, another claim you make. 3 brief rejoinders. Recording your opposition through a system you don't like to begin with, and you don't seem to like Barack Obama, so figuring you have something against the current system, it sounds like a pretty bad way of trying to record something. Voting isn't the only way to record your option, as I've already noted. Direct action and education are better options in my opinion, and the link between not recording your opposition and actually consenting is a weak one at best, via your arguments at least. Maybe there are better arguments, but I haven't heard them from you. You need to further demonstrate that a lack of explicit opposition means necessarily an implied form of consent, and I don't think you've done that thus far. Wrapping up. Non-voting isn't radical, idealistic, or pragmatic. It achieves nothing and, in fact, actively consents to that which you're supposedly against. This is something you say. Now, let me take you on all 4 terms, and again, try to keep it brief. Radical. It can be radical, but it can also be just sitting in your chair and telling no one and not giving a shit. Doing things like starting a Vote for Nobody campaign, links in the description, where you can find out more about that. You can obviously leave a comment and let me know what you think about that and whether you want to start a chapter. Means that you're actively promoting opposition to all candidates and recording that opposition loud and proud, which, if you ask me, seems pretty radical. Now, you say it's idealistic, or it's not idealistic, or something like that. I'm unsure what you meant. Maybe it was a slip of the tongue, but I think you meant that it's not the ideal choice, like some people may claim it is. I claim it is the ideal choice, by the way. But I definitely think voting for nobody, like I just said, is the ideal choice, or Vermin Supreme, or Jimmy McMillan, or, the rent is too damn high guy, or whatever, etc. Especially if you're an anarchist like me, but even if you're not, I don't think voting for someone, whether your vote doesn't matter, is ideal. Achieves nothing. Well, it depends on how you refuse to vote. You can turn that something into positive quite clearly, as I've just showed, through the Voting for Nobody campaign. Now, it makes you actively consent. Well, I think I've dealt with that claim enough to either at least thoroughly discredit it, if not disprove it altogether. And you say besides that, it takes about 5 minutes to vote. Well, of course, just like I wouldn't want to waste a second of my time making some sort of food that I wouldn't want to eat for myself, and I'm just making it for myself, like let's say onions and peppers. Ew, the smell of that's just disgusting. Then in any activity, likewise, in any activity that I thought wasn't going to be practically effective and is morally tenuous to me, that's another subject for another day, I wouldn't get myself involved with. But you say, in conclusion, we have 5 minutes, so why don't we do it? Well, we have 5 minutes. I'm sure I do too. Just not for voting. Not for me. So that's it. I hope this wasn't too long, and I hope I didn't go too fast for people. If people want the transcript of this, because I did rely on a script for this one, I can email them it, and they can get a better sense of what I'm saying, or you can ask me questions in the comments. I think that's about it, and Punk, I would like to thank you for making the video and making me get off my lazy YouTube hiatus ass, and apparently that's now a type of ass. And I'd like to thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys soon. Got some more videos on the way, so see ya.